All right, let's jump straight into this. Picture this for a second. Imagine modern superstars, guys like Kylian Mbappe, Erling Haaland, or Jude Bellingham. Now strip away the multi-million-dollar private jets. Take away the luxury team buses, the isolated five-star hotels, and those massive noise-canceling headphones they always wear. Instead, I want you to imagine cramming all of these elite athletes into the exact same middle-class cruise liner for 2 full weeks straight, right before they have to play the World Cup final. No elite training facilities, no escape, just the open ocean, massive crashing waves, and the fierce rival you've got to ruthlessly defeat next week sitting right across from you at the dinner table. Crazy, right? Well, welcome to our explainer on the SS Conte Verde, the singular ship that literally carried the weight of the 1930 World Cup. I mean, think about the sheer contrast here. Today, we expect perfect isolation and absolute luxury, designed to keep athletes in peak physical and mental condition. But long before private jets, competing teams literally shared an ocean liner to get to the very first World Cup back in 1930. And let me be clear, this was definitely not some pleasant, relaxing boat ride. We're talking a grueling 15-day journey on a shared liner across rough, unpredictable seas. The forced proximity of this trip really establishes exactly what was at stake. These players weren't just battling the elements, they were battling each other long before they ever stepped onto a pitch. So here's the crucial point. This wasn't just a passenger ship anymore. This single steel hull held the entire future of global football. Locked together on the SS Conte Verde were some of the world's most aggressive football rivals, a handful of the most powerful politicians on Earth, and, get this, 3 literal boxes of gold. You really have to understand the fragility of this moment. If anything went wrong on this one ship, a severe storm, an onboard riot, a mechanical failure, the history of the world's biggest sporting event would have sunk straight to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean before the first whistle was ever blown. Section 1. A World Cup in Crisis. 15. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. 15 days. That is how long this grueling journey took. For an elite athlete, taking 15 days off from standard training is essentially a lifetime. So why should we care so deeply about a boat trip from nearly a century ago? Well, because the very first World Cup was actually on the brink of total and absolute failure. For the European players being asked to make this massive trip across the world, this number didn't just represent travel time, it threatened them with total career ruin. Because of this massive timeline, organizers faced immense hurdles. Europe was suffocating in the grip of the Great Depression, and teams were fiercely boycotting the tournament, straight up refusing to travel to South America. They claimed the journey was vastly too dangerous and way too long. Remember, these weren't all multimillionaires. A lot of these players were terrified of losing their normal day jobs back home if they took a whole month off to play a game. On top of that, teams feared completely losing their physical fitness during the voyage. The tournament was basically falling apart. It was at this exact moment of crisis that FIFA President Jules Rimet made a desperate, high-stakes gamble. He chartered a single luxurious Italian ocean liner called the SS Conte Verde to ferry the reluctant Europeans across the globe. Section 2. The Floating Pressure Cooker. Okay, the logistics of this were just wild. On June 21st, 1930, the ship departs Genoa, Italy, and picks up the Romanian team. Then, in late June, it sails and stops in France. There, it grabs the French squad, and crucially, the physical World Cup trophy itself. Next stop, early July, it docks in Rio de Janeiro to pick up the Brazilian squad. Just imagine the tension compounding at every single port. By the time they left Brazil, you had 3 competing nations trapped on one vessel. It was literally a floating pressure cooker, making its way down to that July 4th arrival in Montevideo. Section 3. Psychological Warfare at Sea. So how exactly do elite athletes prepare for the biggest, most physically demanding tournament of their lives on a rocking boat in the middle of the ocean? Short answer, they essentially didn't. This was definitely not a modern gym. The French and Belgian players desperately tried to maintain their cardio by running laps around the top deck, but they kept tripping over wealthy, aristocratic tourists who were just trying to sip their afternoon tea. It's like a comedy sketch. Meanwhile, the Romanians tried a different approach. They attempted intense calisthenics in the underbelly of the ship to avoid the crowds, only to end up violently seasick from inhaling thick, toxic engine fumes. The physical toll was terrible, and the training conditions were completely absurd. But, the physical challenges were really only half the battle. This ship quickly morphed into a psychological war zone. Imagine eating your breakfast right next to the fierce rival that you were scheduled to brutally tackle into the turf next week. No way, right? As the ship got closer to the equator, the blistering heat flared up, serious cabin fever set in, and the inescapable proximity to their opponents turned the SS Conte Verde into a complete mental battlefield. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to secretly strategize. Every meal, every walk on the deck was basically a stare down. Section 4. The Floating Football Carnival. But just when the tension seemed like it would literally snap the ship in half, the atmosphere completely transformed. You had all this intense European tension, the severe cabin fever and the seasickness, and then the Brazilians boarded. They brought an entirely different energy. They hauled their own musical instruments onto the ship, flooding the decks with early samba rhythms. Suddenly, this incredibly tense environment broke into a bizarre but utterly fascinating floating carnival. The European players were captivated. You had French players trying to learn Portuguese, athletes sharing music, and sworn rivals actually dancing on the decks of this ocean liner. Yet, amidst all this newfound joy and chaotic samba music, there was one man who absolutely could not relax. Jules Rimet, the FIFA president. While the carnival raged outside, Rimet kept a super nervous watch in a tiny, locked cabin room. He just sat there, in total isolation, clutching a single suitcase. And inside that suitcase was the dynamic new statuette, the World Cup trophy. He was personally guarding the fragile future of the entire tournament, terrified that one misstep, one theft, or one disaster would end his global football dream forever. Section 5. Landfall in Montevideo. Finally, on July 4th, 1930, the great ship reached its destination in South America. The SS Conte Verde safely docked, unloading its completely exhausted, drastically out of shape, but incredibly hyped passengers. And the scenes at the docks were nothing short of chaotic. Thousands upon thousands of passionate Uruguayan fans flooded the port, swarming the area to welcome the ship. The noise was absolutely deafening. The 1930 World Cup, a tournament that almost never happened, was finally a reality, delivered on the back of one single Italian ocean liner. Which really leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer. Would the World Cup even exist today without this single cruise ship? It's wild to think about how fragile history really is. One boat, carrying a few hundred guys, a locked suitcase, and a whole lot of seasickness is the only reason we have the massive global spectacle we watch today. Without this single cruise ship,